Hey guys, tonight we are slipping quietly into ancient Persia, where the air smells faintly of jasmine, the sandals slap lightly against marble courtyards, and time itself is measured not with ticking clocks or glowing screens, but with bowls floating in water. Yes, bowls. Tiny bobbing saucers, each one dripping, sinking, and reminding a king when his dinner should start, or when he's been talking a touch too long. The irony, of course, is that if you or I lived back then, we probably wouldn't survive long enough to enjoy a cozy story like this. For one thing, no air conditioning, no bug spray, and definitely no snooze button. And yet, there was an elegance here, a softness in the way life gently followed bowls of water as they floated and sank. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and tell me in the comments where you're listening from right now, and maybe even the time of night it is for you. I love imagining all of us scattered across the globe, linked by our sleepy curiosity. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The courtyard breathes around you. Archways cast long shadows across pale sandstone tiles, their curves glowing honey-colored from the lanterns flickering in iron sconces. You step further in, sandals brushing against dust so fine it almost feels like talcum powder under your soles. The sun is just folding itself behind the western hills, leaving streaks of gold and violet across the horizon. In the air, there is that familiar, intoxicating mixture. Smoke from a kitchen hearth, sweetness from ripe pomegranates piled in a basin, and the cool scent of water dancing from marble pools. You're inside a Persian palace, but not during a feast or a war council. Tonight, you're in the in-between hour, the hush before evening properly begins. Fountains murmur, not in abundance, but gently, like someone humming to themselves in another room. Torches crackle, sending out occasional sparks, as servants move quietly, almost as if on tiptoe. You can feel the palace exhale. The king is somewhere close by, though an air of sleepy tranquility makes his presence less intimidating and more curious. He is not pacing in a war-tented, is this quiet moment. His obsession with time that lingers in the air. You pause beside a long reflecting pool, its edges trimmed with carved stone. Lanterns hang above, flickering across the surface. And for a moment you blink, because you're not just seeing water, you're seeing bowls. Dozens of them. They float, gently bumping into each other. They're not meant for feasting or washing, but for something stranger, measuring the hours, one silent splash at a time. It's a little funny, really. In a world where empires rise and fall, where horses thunder across endless plains, one king has decided his anchor is crockery drifting in water, but there's a strange comfort in it. Each bowl has a tiny hole in its bottom, so water seeps in until the weight pulls it down. When it sinks, another is set adrift. Bowls as seconds, bowls as minutes, bowls as the heartbeat of a kingdom. The palace itself seems to settle into that rhythm. The guards, leaning against spears, tap toes with the quiet drip. You notice kitchen smoke puffing in gentle intervals, almost like it has its own pace, as though dinner itself knows when to be ready. You stand there, stifling a smile, because the sound of water trickling into the bowls is remarkably like the world's earliest version of a gentle metronome. Historians say some of these Persian devices were accurate enough to shame even a later European sundial. And yet too can't help but wonder, did the bowls ever bump into one another, confusing a cook into serving bread before lamb, or a guard blowing the horn too soon? You let your gaze wander to the carved columns around you, painted in muted reds and deep indigos with vines winding around their bases. The designs feel almost floral, yet geometrical, as if artists wrestled with both order and imagination. A few moths scatter toward the lantern light, softly bumping against flame and retreating, their small wings singing faint whispers into the evening air. Somewhere, in the background, there's laughter, the light murmur of servants exchanging a sleepy joke, perhaps, about how they could very well tell time by appetite alone. Cool night air rolls down from distant mountains. It wraps itself around your arms and neck, playfully whispering, "You'll need a heavier robe if you plan to linger." Your robe sways in response, brushing past your ankles as another servant glides past you, carrying copper plates, their gleaming surface catching stray lantern light. This is the king's quiet hour, not a meeting of generals with blunt voices, booming strategy, not a heated argument between courtiers about taxes or tribute. No, it is the gentle, experimental breath before night, when the bowls continue their measured duty, and the king, somewhere in the palace's heart, listens. Historians know that Persian rulers like these were not just conquerors, munching dates between battles. They were also collectors of knowledge, catalogers of the curious, and yes, tinkerers of time itself. And here you stand, in that warm twilight blend of smoke, fruit, and dripping water, as though you've been pulled into a suspended moment. Your mind drifts. You wonder if every culture has tried to tame time, as if it were a willful animal tugging at its leash. Some built sundials until the clouds laughed at them. Some built candles until a breeze stole the flame. This king, perhaps smiling slightly in his chambers, chose bowls. Did he chuckle too, the first time he tested his watery contraption, watching porcelain drift like miniature planets across a moat? Did it surprise him that the hours could feel so visible, so physically you could reach out and tap them with a finger? Historians still wonder if the earliest Persian water clocks drifted in sacred pools or practical courtyards. Was it science? Was it ritual? Or simply like your modern alarm clock, an invention created to keep dinner on time? And as shadows stretch across the courtyard, you realize the bowls themselves are falling into their own rhythm with your heartbeat. Each drip, each faint bubble of water, seems to echo the softness inside your chest. The longer you listen, the slower everything feels. The king's obsession begins to work on you, to not as tyranny over minutes, but as a lullaby of seconds. So here you stand, dusk at your back, bowls at your feet, and lanterns flickering overhead as the empire exhales into night. This is where your journey begins. The faint hum of the courtyard still lingers in your ears as you drift a little closer to where the king himself waits. Word travels quickly in palaces. Even in whispers you know he's nearby because the servants keep smoothing their robes, rearranging cushions, and standing straighter whenever a shadow passes. The Persian king has a reputation, not for clashing swords or raising war cries right now, but for something altogether quieter: his curiosity. He is, in a way, the world's most powerful insomniac hobbyist. He peers into bowls of water, not because he's thirsty, but because he's fascinated by how time trickles. Imagine having entire armies at your command, golden halls at your disposal, and yet spending your evenings hunched over a pool, staring at floating dishes. It's a little like being the CEO of a huge company, but sneaking off at lunch to play with toy trains. There's something charming about it, though ruler obsessive enough about science, or rhythm, or maybe just the fun of watching water, to make it a centerpiece of courtly life. You ease yourself into a hall where the air is cooler, stone absorbing the day's heat and releasing it as a soft, consoling breath. There sits the king, long robe unfurling like a river around him. His beard, dark with streaks of silver, shimmers in lantern light, and his eyes sharp, yes, but not cruel tonight, are fixed on a small basin that catches the overflow of a waterspout. His fingers tap idly, unconsciously, as each drop plinks. There's something mesmerizing about watching a man of immense power being gently hypnotized by a bowl. Courtiers stand nearby, their job technically to advise, but clearly they're also trying not to yawn. One scribe dabs his quill on parchment, ready to record observations. The king utters, though you're pretty sure the man's just drawing circles at this point. Asterisk. The king mutters quietly, almost to himself, about precision. And here lies his curiosity. He actually wants to map and tame the fleeting nature of hours. For him, time isn't just sunrise to sunset, it's every little slice in between. In a way, he's less interested in eternity, and more interested in how long it takes to finish a story, or a game of dice, or a meal. Asterisk. Historically, many rulers of ancient Persia were celebrated for their patronage of astronomy, engineering, and art. They sponsored builders, scholars, and dreamers who could craft wonders. This king, too, seems to fall into that pattern, a ruler fascinated enough by knowledge to make it part of governance. And yet, here's the quirky part. While he may dream of exactness, his courtiers are mostly just pretending to see the same thing. Not everyone loves having their daily routine ruled by bowls that decide when to rest, when to eat, when to send out a messenger. Asterisk. You see him gesture, and a servant leans in to nudge one bowl gently to the center. The king smiles faintly, as though the adjustment has restored balance to his universe. You wonder, with a little grin, if he'd ever gotten irritated when someone jostled the fountain mid-experiment, spilling his careful rhythm. Perhaps that's where true palace intrigue happened, not poisonings or assassinations, but some unlucky maid tripping over a basin. Asterisk. The king clears his throat, speaking softly about how the water moves slower in winter, faster in the hot breath of summer. And here, tucked in that small observation, is an actual gem. Persian water clocks often needed adjusting season by season. Ancient engineers knew that temperatures affected the flow, so guardians of time were tasked not only with watching bowls, but also with correcting their sluggishness or hurry. Imagine someone hired solely to ask, is the water too warm to be accurate today, Your Majesty? A career both oddly vital and oddly absurd. Asterisk. That's the regal curiosity you're witnessing. Not conquest, but calibration. Not intimidation, but inquiry. The palace is ruled tonight, not by decree, but by drips. You sense this balance, how the kingdom's greatness seems distilled, for one evening at least, into a trickle of water, a hushed crowd, and a king wondering if he's finally outsmarted the slippery hands of time. Asterisk. Historians still wonder why this fascination lingered so deeply. Was it scientific precision? A way to regulate complex ceremonies, prayers, and meals? Was it ritual? A sense that aligning human life with water honored the gods themselves? Or was it, secretly, simply one man's obsession carried to an imperial scale, like a hobby magnified by crown and courtiers? Perhaps no one will ever know. The answer itself seems to have slipped downstream, just like those bowls. Asterisk. Nearby, a moth settles on your sleeve, flutters once, and vanishes toward the lantern above. You catch yourself smiling, because somehow, standing here, you, too, are caught by the rhythm. You didn't come expecting it, but you and the king now share a quiet obsession. How something as fragile as a wooden bowl in water can claim authority over armies and courtiers alike. Asterisk. The next bowl dips lower, taking its slow breath before it sinks, and the king nods, as though reassured, not just by his invention, but by the steady knowledge that life, even a ruler's life, marches forward, one gentle drop at a time. The bowl wobbles in its watery cradle, pulling your attention toward it like a hypnotist dangling a watch. You lean closer, watching with the same curiosity as a child seeing sand trickle through an hourglass for the first time. Here, however, it isn't sand. It's a slow creeping line of water rising within a delicate little dish, simple, unremarkable, yet charged with the power of making time visible. Asterisk. The king's favorite bowls, you discover, aren't made of gold or silver. Surprisingly, they're often humble brass or copper. polished but plain, because they need lightness to float and sturdiness to survive constant dunkings. Of course, a king could have ordered diamond-studded water clocks, but practicality seems to have won out. After all, losing a gemstone bowl to a fountain would have been an embarrassment even royal dignity couldn't brush away. Asterisk. Each bowl has a tiny pinprick hole at its base, carefully burned or carved through so thinly it seems like nothing at all. And yet, it is the heart of the system. Water creeps inside at a rhythm so steady that astronomers later marveled at its accuracy. One full sinking equals a unit of time. Pour, drip, sink, repeat. That's the royal rhythm. It's strangely satisfying, like watching dominoes fall, or listening to the last crunch when you step on autumn leaves. Asterisk. You crouch lower, noticing that as each bowl succumbs and dips beneath the surface, there's a faint gurgle and a tiny bubble escapes, like the last sigh of a sleepy goldfish. A courtier nearby marks these moments with a tally on parchment. Another servant scoops the bowl up, dries it briskly with a cloth, and sets it back in rotation, an endless relay race of portable minutes. And suddenly, the water clock doesn't just feel like an invention, it feels like theater, with actors playing roles. Bowl, basin, bubble, servant, king. Asterisk. It makes sense when you think about it. Daylight can trick the eye, clouds hide the sun, shadows stretch deceptively long, sundials are fickle in shade, but water is patient, consistent. It doesn't beg attention, but it doesn't stop either. It's the hum beneath the world. You're beginning to understand why this king, sitting in a hall filled with firelight and murmuring voices, found a sort of poetry in it. He's not just timing hours. He's listening to the universe in liquid form. Asterisk. You can't help smiling at the thought, though, that this elegant rhythm isn't entirely foolproof. If the hole is too wide, the bowl sinks too fast, making supper arrive if too narrow, the bowl floats stubbornly, forcing everyone to wait, yawning, until the moment of official dinner. The kitchen staff, once suspects, had their own private opinions about this watery tyranny. Imagine a furious cook stirring stew too long because the bowl above refused to sink on schedule. It's almost comforting to know even the mighty Persians weren't spared the eternal frustration of dinner running late. Asterisk. One widely accepted historical fact is that water clocks of this type, called clepsydras, were used in Persia, India, Egypt, China, and Greece. They were, in many places, among the most reliable instruments of their age, guiding courts through ceremonies, regulating prayers, and even keeping judges honest about how long they spoke. In Persia, they gained a distinctly royal flavor, elevated from tool to symbol because the king himself delighted in their delicate drops. Asterisk. But here's the lesser-known detail. There are tales that in some courts, bowls were shaped like flowers or animals, turning simple sinking into miniature pageantry. Imagine waiting for time to pass and watching a bronze lotus slowly submerge. Did the courtiers stifle laughter when an animal-shaped bowl flopped onto its watery side? You'll never know for sure. But the thought keeps you amused in this already hypnotic room. Asterisk. Historians still puzzle over one question. How precisely were such clocks calibrated in a courtly setting? We know scribes measured and adjusted, but to what degree did faith versus math guide their accuracy? Some argue the bowl simply symbolized the hour, a ceremonial float rather than a strict unit of time. Others insist it was finely tuned engineering, rivaling later mechanical clocks. You, sitting here, decide there's no real hurry to solve that puzzle. It's the drifting and sinking that matter. Asterisk. Your gaze wanders up from the basin, taking in the hall again. The domed ceiling arches high with painted rosettes in faded reds and deep indigo. Oil lamps in carved niches flicker, casting shadows that look almost like moving script. A servant laughs quietly with another as they arrange fresh bowls on a tray. Even here, in the midst of clockwork solemnity, human levity leaks through. Asterisk. And then a bowl sinks, another takes its place. You feel your own lungs timing themselves with this gentle handoff. Breathe in, bowl afloat. Breathe out, bowl descending. You didn't plan it, but you're syncing yourself with the world's earliest smart device. Designed centuries before phone alarms or glowing screens. The king, you notice, has that same half-dreamy look in his eye. You wonder, with a smirk, if he too sometimes found himself remembering to breathe because the bowls reminded him. Asterisk. The rows of courtiers shuffle silently, waiting for the next drip, the next bubble, the next small but momentous plop into water. The kingdom lives minute by minute, bowl by bowl, and so do you. The basin room gives way to quieter corridors, where tapped footsteps echo against stone walls, and voices dim to murmurs. You slip out into a courtyard that hums, with quieter energy, less ceremonial, more practical. This is where time trickles into everyday lives. And suddenly, you notice something fascinating. The bowls of water keep rhythm, not just for the king, but for everyone around him. The empire doesn't just measure time, it lives by it. Asterisk scribes huddle on low benches nearby, their reed pens scratching steadily across parchment. It isn't random they rise when a bowl dips, marking another completed span of duty. If you look at their tallies, you'd almost think they were accountants for the seconds themselves. Not lines of silver or gold, but of minutes recorded faithfully like treasures tumbling across a page. You settle near them for a moment, listening to the faint squeak of ink against rough paper and the whispered sighs of men trying to outlast their own drowsiness. Asterisk further along, past the shadow of a column, cooks scurry in their own little universe. Cauldrons bubble, smells drift, spiced lamb slow roasting, honey syrup simmering until it thickens into threads. They aren't quite tied to the bowls themselves, but the palace messenger carries the rhythm from courtyard to kitchen. You catch him leaning into a smoky doorway and whispering, "Another bowl has sunk." With that, the cook nods and adjusts his stirring. It's like the clang of a kitchen timer without the clang. Just the soft knowledge that a bubble has popped in a distant pool. Asterisk daily life unfolds with subtle obedience. Stable masters pace their horses' feedings with it. Guards change position when the tally is marked. Even a storyteller, leaning against the wall with a lute, plucks notes in phrases that conveniently seem to pause every hour. You sense a society adjusted not by bells or rooster crows, but by ripples. Asterisk, it's unexpectedly cozy. There's no harsh clang, no screeching alarm clock hurling you into the day. Instead, there's only the soothing sound of water welcoming you into each segment of your tasks. Scribble this, stir that, brush the horse's mane, strum 3 chords. It all bends toward the pulse of liquid patience. Asterisk, that doesn't mean everyone is thrilled. You overhear 2 servants whispering about how yesterday's bowls were quicker, because the air had been warmer, forcing them to clean the palace floor nearly an hour earlier than their liking. You stifle a grin. Humans may be many centuries earlier, but the universal truth remains. Nobody enjoys someone else's schedule, deciding their morning chores. Asterisk, the history books recognize water clocks across Persia primarily for sacred and official duties, regulating prayers, aligning ceremonies, setting fair durations for judges' speeches. But here in the palace, in this soft hour of half work, half list, you notice something humbler. It's handy for tracking when to feed the cats that roam the kitchens. Tails curling around ankles with impeccable timing. That detail won't end up in scrolls or histories, but it's here, alive before your eyes. Asterisk, a lesser-known fact slips into the scene. Royal water clocks weren't just confined to indoor basins. Some were part of grand gardens, with channels channeling water through multiple stations, bowls drifting like water lilies performing choreography. In your mind's eye, you imagine servants hurrying outside, checking stations in sequence. First bowl sunk, second bowl holding steady, Third bolo no overflowed into the koi pond. Somewhere, in that blend of order and slip-ups lies the charm of the whole system. And yet, historians still debate how much of daily life really bent to this watery rhythm. Did workers truly wait for bowls to sink, or did they simply nod respectfully toward the king's little invention and carry on with natural daylight? Perhaps it was more symbolic than practical, a ritual that let people feel regulated even if their stomachs, shadows, and instincts told different times. The question continues to ripple, unanswered, across centuries. Still, here and now, in this hall, you feel how people adapt. They stretch tasks, shorten chores, hum songs, or pause for a sip of wine whenever they sense the bowls reaching their quiet climax. What strikes you most is not stress, but flow. Nothing is jarring. Nobody leaps at a horn blast. You're enveloped in something more dreamlike, where the drip, the bowl, the breath, all feel patiently entwined. A servant brushes past you, carrying a platter with dates. One slips, lands softly at your feet. You pick it up and bite the sticky sweetness melting across your tongue. Even your snack seems synced with the bowls. You smile, because you realize, your life here, however temporary, is suddenly calibrated by floating dishes. You're a creature of the clepsydra, just like the rest. Another bowl, releases air, takes its dive. Whispers fade, ink pools dry in half-finished columns, and stewpots bubble in chorus. The rhythm continues, steady as a heartbeat, weaving time into the hands of an empire. You've drifted along with the rhythm of the bowls, and now your wandering feet carry you into a quieter stretch of the palace, less echo of dripping water, more whisper of fabric against stone. The air feels different here, perfumed not by stew or smoke, but by folds of dye and silken threads. This is where clothing breathes its own story. The robes, sandals, and wraps that swish and glide with each deliberate movement. Someone passes you wearing a robe, the color of crushed pomegranate. Its hem embroidered with patterns of curling vines and gold thread. It rustles as they walk, catching lamplight, almost glowing against the darker walls. The sound of it is strangely soothing, like autumn leaves brushing against one another. Clothes, you realize, aren't just decoration here, they're statements. A robe whispers, rank. A sash shouts, status. And sandals announce wealth, with every creak of leather. The Silk Road is the artery pulsing just beyond these walls, and you can see its influences woven into these garments. Fabrics from distant China brush shoulders with Persian wool. Dyes arrive in hues, rare enough to seem like bottled sunsets. Soft cotton folds are imported through Indian trade lines, while brocades shimmer from Byzantium. The empire is a fashion show without needing a runway, because the courtyard itself provides one, every merchant caravan stitching new threads into the royal wardrobes. You run your fingers, gingerly, across a bolt of silk waiting to be cut. It's smooth, almost slippery, as though the fabric is trying to escape your grip. One fact firmly acknowledged: Persia thrived from its connection to the Silk Road, not only in goods, but in ideas, clothing included. And it wasn't simply indulgence. Garments displayed diplomatic power. To wear silk wasn't just vanity, announced connections across mountains, deserts, and distant seas. But the quirkier detail. Some sandals crafted with clever stitching and padded soles squeaked faintly when their owners walked across marble. Courtiers reportedly teased one another behind fans, convinced that the footwear betrayed nervousness like a guilty conscience. Somewhere in this same palace, you can almost hear it. Squeak step, while another courtier smirks politely, pretending not to notice. Historians still puzzle over how faithful such wardrobes were to daily routines. Did common servants glimpse their king in simpler robes, when no ceremony called? Did he stroll out in soft cotton, avoiding the heavy silk embroideries just to give his shoulders a break? Or was even his most casual attire still a parade? No chronicler thought to note, and so the question remains, was royal leisure as decorative as royal duty? Asterisk. You move further along, and notice guards posted against the walls. They're draped less grandly, but with no less significance. Thick belts at their waists. Straight-cut tunics threaded with patterns bold enough to assert loyalty. Their sandals crunch faintly against gravel in the courtyard outside, straps laced neatly across calves. Once such soldiers clanged in bronze or iron, but tonight, in the softer version of their duty, they almost look like actors waiting for their cue. Robes swaying as torches flicker beside them. Asterisk as you walk past. The whisper of fabrics seems to accompany you everywhere. Silk gliding like water, cotton sighing like wind through reeds, leather pressing like steady heartbeats against marble. The sensory chorus builds its own hypnotic lull, a wardrobe woven directly into the atmosphere. Asterisk, you stop at a tapestry resting in the corner, half completed. A weaver has left her shuttle nearby, threads still wound like patient serpents of color. Patterns form, cypress trees winding toward the sky, birds mid-flight, flowers eternal in bloom. You think of time again, how the bowls trickle hours into the king's pool, while garments and cloths freeze moments into thread. The palace marks time in both water and fabric. You float between them. Asterisk, another bowl sinks in the distance. Though you don't need to see it anymore, you feel its echo in the swish of a sleeve, the tap of a sandal. The king's curiosity merges with the artistry of cloth. Time isn't just measured, it's draped. It slides along with the scraping of your sandals, wrapping you in another hour's softness. Asterisk, and if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear silk laughing lightly as it whispers across the floor, as though even the fabric itself finds humor in the fact that this vast empire rests upon bowls, bobbing gently in water. The scent of roasted lamb drifts lazily through the corridors, drawing you forward like a gentle tug on a string. You wander toward the dining hall, guided by the hum of voices and the faint shuffle of servants preparing low tables with careful precision. A feast by candlelight is beginning. Its rhythm is always gently tethered to the bowls, sinking out in the courtyards. Asterisk, the space opens wide before you, its ceiling arching like a star-studded sky, frozen in painted blues and creams. Long wooden tables are polished until they gleam as though they're holding the firelight itself. Low cushions line the edges, intended not for rushed meals, but for prolonged reclining. Food here isn't simply eaten, it's lingered over, savored, stretched across hours. And yet, those hours owe their shape to bowls floating and sinking outside. Imagine your dinner at home, being paced not by your appetite, but by the soft plop of pottery into water. That's the peculiar rhythm here. Asterisk, servants glide along like shadows, placing trays piled high with steaming dishes. The lamb arrives first, roasted until the edges are caramel gold, spiced with cinnamon and cumin. Dates, plump and sticky, follow, rolling across brass trays like jewels. A bowl of honey glistens beside stringy cheese, and pitchers of wine gleam ruby red as they catch reflections from candle flames. Time itself feels sweet and slow here, like syrup. Asterisk, the king reclines among his courtiers, one hand lazily propped against a cushion, the other pulling fragments of meat from a platter. Even he moves within the rhythm. A bowl sinks, a servant adjusts his cup, another course arrives. The sync between appetite and invention feels oddly theatrical, like dinner performed in acts, each timed with dripping water. Asterisk, you stretch out on a cushion as well, sliding closer to the edge of a table. The fabric beneath you is embroidered with tiny cypress motifs, soft against your fingertips. A servant offers you fresh bread, blistered from the fire, still warm against your palm. You tear a piece, thick and chewy, dipping it into a bowl of thick yogurt, cooling your mouth after a bite, too rich in spice. The sensation makes you sigh. The laughter around the hall deepens. You do fit in. After all, one clear historical fact shines here. Persian feasts weren't rushed affairs. They were elaborate rituals of movement and layering, where one dish replaced another, where poetry could intrude between bites, where wine accompanied music, and where conversation always flowed longer than the food itself. Eating was social glue, a measure of civility, as substantial as the bread itself. The bowls outside gave these moments a framework, ensuring balance between conversation, laughter, and endlessly replenished platters. But here's the quirkier, lesser-known detail. Certain desserts were considered dream foods, sticky sweets mixed with herbs thought to encourage vivid dreams, eaten deliberately late in the feast. Imagine nibbling candied figs while a poet insists you'll travel through stars in your sleep. It's a wonderfully human combination, filling bellies with sugar while filling minds with illusions. You bite into one now, syrup clinging to your fingers, and think you wouldn't mind a night sky stroll either. The hall thrums with layers of sound, lute strings plucked gently in the corner, courtiers telling jokes about generals who couldn't tell a camel from a mule, children darting under tables giggling before being gently ushered back by indulgent parents. And all the while, whisper thoods of servants confirm each new dish is perfectly aligned with bowls sinking outside, neither too early nor too late. A performance smooth as silk. You sip wine from a delicate metal cup sweet, slightly spiced with hints of saffron. The candle beside you flickers, reflected in the cup's rippling surface. You wonder for a moment what it would be like to eat without the bowls guiding everything. Would the feast collapse into chaos? Would the timing stumble, turning delicate rhythms into dissonance? Historians continue to wonder if timekeeping here was truly rigid, or simply ceremonial. Was it the bowls dictating each serving, or merely symbolizing the gentle order of the evening? Another bowl sinks somewhere outside, though by now you don't need confirmation. You feel it. A platter is whisked away. Another glides in stuffed grape leaves this time, tangy, supple, wrapped tight like tiny presents. You bite, savor, and smile, because the whole feast feels like time itself made edible. You lean back finally, stomach pleasantly full, and eyelids heavier than before. Candles burn lower, the music lilts softer. The king stretches with satisfaction, and you realize that the feast is winding down in rhythm with the water. The bowls, faithful companions, have marked the evening like an invisible host. Dinner has been eaten on schedule, not too rushed, not too slow, just as the king likes it. You close your eyes momentarily, warm bread still lingering at the edges of your thoughts, and breathe deeply. Somewhere, two servants chuckle softly, as though sharing their own secret dessert. Your lips pull into an easy smile, because this isn't just supper, it's story, ritual, clock, and theater, all steered by a ripple in a fountain. You drift away from the hall's heavy sense of roasted lamb and roasted stories, following the night air where it flows freer, cooler, and calmer. The feast has left you drowsy, but instead of collapsing onto a cushion, you wander through tall wooden doors that creak softly on their hinges. At once the atmosphere loosens, the chatter of courtiers fades into the distance, replaced by the hum of cicadas and the faint splash of water. You've stepped into the palace gardens, the quiet lungs of Persia. The moment you inhale, the air shifts inside you. The smell is intoxicating. Jasmine blooming on clustered vines, roses curling elegantly on trellises, pomegranate fruit splitting open to reveal glowing seeds under the moonlight. Each scent competes, but not rudely. They mingle in patient harmony, like guests at a gathering who've known one another all their lives. You pause at the edge of one path, brushing your fingers against waxy leaves, glistening with the evening's cool dew. Everywhere around you, marble channels carry water along straight lines, branching into pools, set deliberately among beds and groves. These aren't just pretty features. The Persians designed gardens as paradise itself, carefully balanced microcosms of the universe. A trickling stream here doesn't just nourish plants. It whispers of rivers flowing in harmony. Trees don't simply shade the path, they symbolize vitality and eternity. Standing here, you feel as though someone handed you a map to both heaven and earth, stitched together out of stone, water, and fragrance. Asterisk, a nightingale sings from a cypress tree, its bubbling song spilling joy into the dark. You tilt your head toward it and feel a chuckle stirring because the songbird seems oddly aware of its time slot, appearing right on cue as another bowl somewhere in the palace tips below water. The garden, like the feast, leans toward rhythm. Asterisk, you stroll further, guided by lanterns hung low on iron hooks, their light painting golden pools against the gravel path. A breeze drifts across your cheek, lifting hair, tugging gently at your clothes. You close your eyes for a moment. It's not that you're here to be dazzled, it's that you want to dissolve into this quiet order. Everything is balanced. Scent, sound, shadow. Even time itself seems softer here, not dripping into bowls, but blooming slowly, like a rose. Asterisk, one clear historical fact comes to mind. Persian gardens, known as paradisa, profoundly influenced later Islamic architecture, and even European visions of paradise. The word paradise itself, in fact, traces back to these enclosed gardens. For Persians, tending a perfectly symmetrical grove was not only horticulture, it was cosmology and comfort. Asterisk, but allow yourself a little grin at the quirkier detail. Gardeners had to deal with mischievous palace cats digging around the garden beds. Imagine the king's carefully laid out vision of universal harmony, interrupted by a ginger cat rolling smugly in a lavender patch. Some wary gardener no doubt cursed feline intrusions, while courtiers politely ignored the divine order being reshuffled by paws. In the true fabric of life, even paradise includes the sound of purring mischief. Asterisk. Historians still wonder about subtleties of these spaces. Did every layout carry cosmic meaning? Or were some simply practical royal backyards that scholars later romanticized? Were all the elegant, symbolic designs truly intentioned? Or did some gardeners just like how roses looked with fountains? The line between ritual and convenience blurs like rippling water at the edge of a pool. Asterisk, as you continue along the gravel, you glimpse moonlight caught in the water channels, gliding downstream like liquid silver. Trees rustle above, olive branches swaying gently. You hear footsteps behind you, a servant carrying a jug of wine through the garden, probably tasked with replenishing the king himself. The boy pauses to watch the nightingale, smiles faintly, then continues. Even the smallest tasks move within the embrace of this fragrant, glowing sanctuary. Asterisk. You come across a pavilion in the distance, small structure with tiled arches and cushions scattered beneath it. You settle onto one, testing the softness, and find yourself reclining in the center of the garden's heartbeat. From here, every channel arcs out symmetrically. Every blossom tilts toward you in balance. You stretch your legs and tilt your head back to watch stars peek from their velvet canopy above. Asterisk. The bowls may orchestrate things inside the feast. The scribes, the duties yet here outside. It's the garden itself that takes up the role of timekeeper. Each rosebud opening, each breeze shifting fragrance, each slow accented call of cicadas tells you not of minutes, but of cycles eternal. Asterisk. Your eyes grow heavier than before, lids lowering as another wave of fragrance drifts past. The sweet blend of night flowers feels like incense for dreaming. You smile to yourself because you realize Persian kings didn't only master time in bowls of water. They mastered time in gardens, where eternity quietly mingles with moonlight and roses. You linger in the garden's serenity until a faint rustle of parchment and the low murmur of calculation draws your ear. Not exactly the sound of poetry, and not the clink of dishes being cleared from the feast. It's more like muttering numbers in a tone suspiciously close to prayer. You slip back through a shaded arch and find yourself in the presence of the court astrologer, a curious man hunched over scrolls that look like they've never known rest. Asterisk, the astrologer sits cross-legged on a low rug, one hand smudged in ink, the other pointing through the night toward a scatter of stars. His beard is wild, his robe sprinkled with what you suspect are breadcrumbs from earlier, and his eyes, wide, gleaming as though he hasn't quite blinked in an hour or two. This is not a man easily distracted. Where you see constellations, he sees schedules. Where you admire moonlight, he sees prophecy. And tonight, he, too, is trying to balance the rhythm of sky and bowls. Asterisk, he raises a finger. Dramatically, the stars breathe as the bowls breathe. Courtiers nearby nod with feigned enthusiasm, though you notice one of them trying not to giggle. The astrologer insists that the sinking of each bowl aligns with familiar constellations, Orion's belt, the Pleiades, Venus in her glory. You almost expect him to suggest that if one bowl sinks too quickly, Mars must be in a foul mood. Asterisk, one firmly accepted fact grounds this scene. Persian rulers did indeed employ court astrologers, men revered as keepers of cosmic wisdom. Astronomy and astrology weren't yet divorced. Observing the heavens was as much about predicting eclipses as it was about advising kings when to dine, pray, or conquer. August ceremonies were often timed by both water clocks and sky charts. Tonight, you feel both pressing gently over your shoulders. Asterisk, but a quirkier tale drifts in on whispers. Sometimes scholars argued heatedly about whether bowls were truly syncing with the heavens. One might insist that the flowing water was calculating Jupiter's kind of rhythm, while another sneered, confident that Saturn was the better master of ours. You suppress a grin, imagining scholars bickering like children fighting over who gets to hold the TV remote. Your Saturn is too slow. Well, your Jupiter keeps skipping beats. Asterisk, and still, the deeper puzzle rings. Historians debate how much the stars truly ruled decisions, as opposed to simply decorating them. Did rulers really wait patiently for Jupiter's approval before sending messengers across distant deserts? Or did they make choices and tether them afterward to a convincing constellation story? Even scholars today shrugged, caught between cosmic destiny and pragmatic politics. You let the question float, unanswered, like a bowl not yet sunk. Asterisk, the astrologer, meanwhile, keeps pouring his gaze into the sky. Venus breathes, he mutters, and we must breathe with her. He gestures, dramatically pacing his breath against the bowl's rhythm. You can't help following his lead. Inhale as a bowl floats steady, exhale as it tips into the depths with a gentle gulp. Strangely, it does slow you down. The act dials your body into the same serenity as the night itself. Asterisk, from where you sit. Scrolls cover the rug around hymn maps of stars dotted like spilled sesame seeds across parchment. Wax candles stubbed to their bases illuminate every swirl of ink, the shadows shifting across constellations as though mimicking their nightly movements. He draws a quick line, marking what he claims is the Bolst-Orion ratio. You don't know about the science of it, but from the passion in his eyes, this is gospel. Asterisk, a servant coughs politely, carrying in a small tray of figs. The astrologer grabs one absent-mindedly and chews, while continuing to mutter calculations to himself. Juice dripping unnoticed onto the parchment. You suppress another laugh. It's oddly comforting to discover that even grand cosmic interpreters still snack between prophecies. Asterisk, above you. The sky stretches wide, stars etched clearer than you've ever seen, as though the firmament itself polished for the king's evening. You notice the faint shimmer of the Milky Way, endless as the waterways of the garden below. The astrologer sees order. You see wonder. Between the two lies a truth. Time in bowls, in stars, in human hearts flows whether or not anyone labels it. Asterisk, the next bowl sinks somewhere outside. The astrologer closes his eyes reverently, perhaps certain that the heavens have just nodded in agreement. You smile faintly, leaning back, your head brushing a stone pillar, cool against your scalp. For a moment, you understand him. There is a gentle connection between water and stars, both steady in their own slow patterns, both whispering reminders that ours are not ours. They are shared with the universe. Asterisk, the astrologer scribbles one last note, sighs contentedly, and finally yawns. Even prophecy, it seems, needs sleep. The astrologer's muttering fades into the background as you wander deeper into the palace, where the night thickens and voices soften into that peculiar mood reserved for stories. You find yourself pulled toward a quiet corner lined with cushions, lanterns dimly glowing against stucco walls. Here, courtiers recline in a semicircle around a man holding not scrolls, not bowls, not celestial charts, but simply a voice. The storyteller has arrived. His robe is simple, his hair tucked neatly under a faded turban, but his voice fills the hall better than all the brass trumpets in the world. Everyone listens. Even guards pause at their posts, leaning slightly closer. His weapon is rhythm, intonation, and the kind of pauses that make you itch to know what comes next. And of course, the bowls outside mark each chapter, drip by drip. Though the storyteller swears he's faster than the water, he begins with a tale of kings long ago, older even than Persia, older than memory stories, where rivers themselves learned to speak, and mountains shifted when commanded. He tells of jinn lingering in the desert winds, of giant birds whose wings blocked the sun, and of a fisherman who once convinced a sea to bow politely before him. The crowd hums at that one, whether from delight or disbelief. You're not certain. One clear historical fact unfolds easily. Storytelling was treasured in Persian courts as entertainment, moral teaching, and cultural glue. Tales traveled along the Silk Road as surely as silks did. Myths and fables whispered across caravans before spilling into palaces where listeners reclined. With wine cups balanced delicately in hand, oral tradition thrived, binding people together with laughter, awe, and perhaps the tiniest shiver of fear. But tonight, the quirkier detail makes you chuckle quietly to yourself. Courtiers, careful not to offend the storyteller, sometimes pretended to be deeply moved, but were in reality dozing off. A sudden snore would occasionally puncture the silence, drawing laughter beneath the surface. You catch one man now, head bobbing perilously toward his neighbor's shoulder, his own dreams probably more literal than mythical. The storyteller wisely ignores it, pressing forward as if the performance were as captivating as the river spirits themselves. And still here lies a question that tickles historians. Did storytellers embellish with complete freedom, or were they nudged by courts to present certain morals? Did a tale of a greedy king scold rulers, or reassure them they weren't that bad? Was the giant bird a symbol, or simply a bird big enough to scare children into cleaning their rooms? The answer vanished with the smoke of ancient torches. The debates flutter aimlessly like night moths. The storyteller sharpens his voice, lifting it like a banner. His words bend images in your mind, an ocean tossing under moonlight, a caravan trudging endless dunes, a hero bowing beside a pool where bowls floated, just like tonight's. You can't help but grin, realizing they've woven the king's favorite hobby into myth itself. Perhaps there was once a hero who measured time with water, and perhaps the king likes to imagine he's repeating that tale every evening. The air thickens with the sweetness of dried fruit. A plate of apricots is passed around the circle. You take one bite into its chewy center, and the sugar lingers long enough to blur slightly with the cadence of the storyteller's words. You notice then how his voice rises and falls just like the bowls. Each pause is a drip, each plot twist a splash, each conclusion a sinking with the next tale surfacing as naturally as another vessel being set afloat. Your eyelids lower as he moves on to a story about a man who tried bargaining with the moon for extra time, promising jewels and feasts, if the hours would simply drag their heels. The moon, unamused, declined. Laughter trembles through the circle. You smirk softly too, imagining the moon folding its arms and saying, "No appointments after midnight, thank you." The man at your side finally loses the battle and snores, just loud enough to make a few heads turn. Courtiers glance at one another, stifling their chuckles, though one young boy lets out a laugh before slapping his hand across his mouth. The storyteller doesn't falter. He's practiced in speaking over sleep, over murmurs, over the shifting tides of attention. After all, that's half the point. Legends aren't meant to end, they're meant to outlast. Another bowl tips outside. The ripples carry through the marble. The storyteller's voice continues, calm, magnetic, draped over you like a blanket that smells faintly of figs, smoke, and rose water. And you, nestled into the circle, begin to realize stories here aren't simply told. Stories are time itself. The storyteller's voice fades into the stone walls, like incense curling into air, leaving you both warmed and lulled. When you blink your eyes open again, the hall seems quieter, emptier. You feel a pull, that soft instinct calling your feet toward the edge of the palace. Past the great doors, past draped curtains, you find yourself slipping into the streets at the fringe of the city. And here, for the first time tonight, you step into the hum of ordinary life, a marketplace awakening under torchlight. Asterisk. It's not the raucous din of a day market with bargaining shouts and merchants fanning away flies. No, this scene lives in half-light, humming gently, as if the entire bazaar is trying not to disturb your drowsy state. Wooden shutters creak open. Stalls reveal hidden treasures like secrets being whispered into strangers' palms. Lanterns swing from crooked posts, glowing gold over neat mounds of walnuts, piles of figs, coils of rope, baskets spilling with saffron-stained rice. Asterisk traders begin unpacking their goods carried in from distant deserts. Silk from China unfurls under torchlight, shimmering like the reflection of moonlight on water. Spices dust, the air-sharp cumin, licorice-sweet anise, and the faint tickle of pepper that makes your nose almost twitch. You drag your hand across a stray bolt of turquoise cotton, and it feels like the desert breeze woven into fabric. Asterisk, and still, the bowls tick on somewhere back at the palace. Strange, you think. Even here, far enough from the courtyard fountains, the rhythm continues. One merchant taps his foot habitually, almost unconsciously, like someone who has grown up counting moments from the sound of sinking vessels. Another adjusts his display only after a pause, as if waiting for that invisible cue. It seems the drip of water in distant marble basins exerts influence across the veins of the city. Asterisk. One historical fact stands firmly beside you. Persian markets weren't just centers for objects, they were crossroads of ideas. It wasn't unusual for merchants to trade verses of poetry alongside peppercorns, for doctors to trade remedies as readily as herbs, for philosophers to stroll through alleys and leave with fabrics and arguments. The bazaar was the empire's bloodstream, asterisk, and yet hidden among the monumental commerce. Smaller, quirkier details flicker. A weaver whistles tunelessly, laying out rugs so colorful it seems they're stitched with the sun itself. A boy chases a stray goat between baskets of olives, both boy and goat slipping briefly beneath a spice curtain like naughty spirits. One vendor slices open a melon, only to discover it's too unripe. He shrugs, laughs, and stashes it under his stall to ripen by tomorrow, though you suspect he'll find it squashed by midnight. Asterisk as you pass. You overhear gossip about the court's obsession with bowls. Do they really live by them? One merchant asks another, his voice thick with amusement. The second shrugs, amused yet skeptical. If my goats had to wait for bowls before milking, they'd stampede. You smile. It seems not all of Persia is quite convinced by the king's watery calculus. Asterisk. But historians still argue over something similar. How much of Persian life was genuinely bound by scientific instruments? Was it mostly an elite performance in royal walls, while the everyday man leaned on instincts, sunrise, stomachs, and shadows? The question hangs unsolved, like bowls drifting and never sinking. Asterisk. One old man in a corner sells trinkets made of bronze sundials, small enough to fit in a palm, toys shaped like leaping horses, and even miniature water bowls. He hands you one, as if testing. You hold it up, feel the weight, almost imagine it dripping its patient rhythm. He chuckles knowingly, pocketing a coin from your palm with a wink. And somehow, you feel as if you've bought not just a trinket, but a fragment of their time. Asterisk. The market is alive, but never overwhelming. Scents float gently past. Lamps arch shadows over cobbled alleys. Cats wind through narrow paths, tails lifted proudly. And above it all, the tranquil sigh of the city seems aligned, however faintly, with those drifting bowls tucked far away in royal stone. A bazaar becomes not just an exchange of goods, but an extension of the kingdom's quiet metronome. Asterisk. Another soft splash echoes somewhere in your imagination, the thought of one more bowl dipping yet here. In this marketplace, time feels looser, softer. Perhaps merchants honor the king's rhythm only in spirit, reshaping it into sales, chatter, and late-night exchanges. Either way, you drift through the stalls, smiling, more certain than ever that the empire inhales and exhales in bowls, whether brass, copper, or merely metaphorical. The marketplace lingers behind you, a memory of saffron and soft chatter pressed like a pressed flower into your mind. Now, following a cooler corridor, you slip back toward the palace walls, where the soundscape grows sparse again. Fewer voices, fewer laughs, more silence, broken only by boots against stone. Ahead of you, torchlight flickers against helmets and polished shields. You've wandered into the stretch of the palace where the soldiers keep their quiet watch. Asterisk. It's not the trumpet blaring kind of watch from stories of conquests. Tonight, their duty is steady, calm, and strangely domestic. Spears lean against walls as men pace measured steps. The marble reflects the orange glow of their torches, shadows swaying like slow dancers at the edge of the courtyard. You notice something instantly. Even they, perhaps unconsciously, seem to time their rotations to the rhythm of the bowls sinking somewhere closer to the king's heart. A drip becomes a step. A bowl dipping becomes the cue to swap posts. Water has commanded their stride as much as orders ever did. Asterisk. The guards are alert, but not severe. One fingers his scabbard lazily, whistling a broken tune. Another stretches, groaning softly from the weight of armor pressing his shoulders. They're less like statues of authority now, and more like night shift workers anywhere on Earth. Bored, a bit stiff, trying not to yawn too loudly. Asterisk. One historically accepted fact comes alive before your eyes. Persian soldiers, from palace guards to border patrols, were famously disciplined, with their empire's military structure inspiring much of the classical world that followed. Even the king's bodyguards were chosen carefully and drilled with near-sacred precision. Their presence mattered not just in muscle, but in symbol. They were walls within walls, security embodied in human form. Asterisk. And yet, tucked among such grandeur, a quirkier, almost funny detail exists. Some guards reportedly borrowed time by resting their eyes while leaning against pillars, using the sound of sinking bowls as a wake-up call. In other words, the earliest snooze alarms weren't brass bells, but bowls plopping into basins. You half expect to see one of these men jerk awake now, startled by water's timing, straightening instantly with a practiced cough. Asterisk. But soon, your mind drifts to subtler debates. Historians puzzle over the extent of these nightly rituals. Were soldiers really that attuned to palace clocks? Or was this water-shadowed order more symbolic than practical? Did they schedule their posts by dripping time? Or did torchlight and instinct guide them more than ripples from bowls they never saw? Perhaps, as often in history, The answer is both, disguised in ceremony but softened in practice. Asterisk, you stroll forward, gravel crunching faintly beneath your sandals, catching a soldier's sideways glance. He nods, friendly enough, and continues his pacing. His bronze shield catches starlight for a second, reflecting silver like a slice of moon strapped to his arm. Another guard adjusts the leather strap on his sandal, grimacing as though still breaking it in. You nearly laugh, realizing that even imperial soldiers can suffer the ancient version of blistered feet. Asterisk above you. The stars prick sharper through the night sky, matching rhythm for rhythm with the slow turn of guards, swapping places along the wall. The clicking of spears against stone almost becomes music if you let yourself hear it that way. It's not threatening at all, more like percussion to the kingdom's lullaby. Even war, even duty, here is pressed smoothly into song. Asterisk, a breeze drifts past, tugging little sparks free from one of the torch flames. They float like glowing insects before dying softly in the air. The guards don't even look. It's all part of the nightscape they've inherited, as faithfully as their armor. Asterisk, for a moment, you close your eyes. You hear almost nothing but a soldier's soft sigh, the drip of water bending into endless repetition, and the faint bray of a donkey far beyond the palace walls. Strangely enough, duty and exhaustion blur together into tenderness. Guards, bowls, beasts all playing their small private role in wrapping the empire in safety until dawn. Asterisk. Another bowl sinks inside the courtyard with its soft final gulp, and one soldier mutters, "Shift done," as another steps in without missing a stride. No blows of horns, no stern fanfare, just bowl by bowl, drip by drip. The empire keeps itself awake, even as you feel yourself slipping gently further into drowsiness. Asterisk. The rhythmic pacing of the guards fades into the shadows behind you, replaced now by a subtler sound, the scrape of metal on stone, a faint clink of bronze, and the gentle worry of something small being tinkered with. Intrigued, you follow the noises until you arrive at a tucked-away chamber, lit by only 2 lamps that flicker dully, as though they, too, are caught between duty and nap time. Asterisk. Inside, you discover the palace's inventor's nook, the workroom, where small wonders come alive, less grand than armored soldiers or golden banquets, but no less enchanting. Here, tables are cluttered with what looks like controlled chaos. Bits of bronze tubing, sections of wood planed flat, half-finished sketches scribbled on wax tablets. It smells faintly of oil, mixed with cedar, and just the tiniest trace of singed fingers and inventor's perfume. Asterisk. At one table, a man tests a miniature toy, a tiny bird fashioned of bronze, wound with string, wings flapping in a jerky little rhythm. He sets it off across the floor. It flutters, hops, then crashes into the wall with a clink, startling him into laughter. You chuckle too, because even after centuries, inventors everywhere still share that same sheepish grin when experiments land differently than planned. Asterisk. 1. Historical truth grounds the scene. The Persian courts valued not just scholars of astronomy, medicine, or poetry, but engineers and designers. From hydraulic wonders in gardens to clever irrigation systems feeding entire cities, Persian ingenuity helped turn desert into paradise. Within palaces, smaller contraptions thrived, 2 curiosities that might be both entertainment and experiment, equally admired and puzzled over by the curious king. Asterisk. But here's the sweeter, quirkier detail. Some early ticking devices like the water bowls themselves sometimes served as toys of display, brought out not just for measurement, but to amuse. Some accounts even mention courts where playful gadgets puffed little bursts of scented smoke or sent small wooden figures drifting across pools. Imagine being paid to invent the empire's equivalent of party tricks, a noble job for any tinkerer. Asterisk. You lean closer to another half-assembled contraption, a sundial barely the size of your palm, etched so precisely that its grooves catch even the small lamplight. Another table nearby groans under the weight of a half-finished gear system, simple cogs carved from wood, inspiring you to imagine a time when such simple wheels might evolve into vast machines that rule centuries later. Asterisk. And yet historians tilt their heads at such fragments. Were these small wonders purely decorative, little amusements to tickle royalty under moonlit banquets? Or were they prototypes, genuine attempts to stretch the empire's science? Were inventors dreaming of something practical, or playing just as earnestly as children with blocks? Like many things measured only by water, bowls, and memory, the answer sinks into obscurity. Asterisk. Across the room, a young assistant fiddles with a polished bowl filled halfway with oil. He sets a wick afloat, and it glows briefly before tilting, caught in its own wobble. A timer, he murmurs proudly to nobody in particular. You realize you've stumbled upon a cousin to the king's water bowl's a flame clock in its infant form. The boy grins, his face lit amber, proud of his tiny, inadequate night sun. You can't help imagining how delighted the king might be, intrigued enough to demand a demonstration during his next sitting. Asterisk. The room hums with quiet companionship, inventors muttering, tools scraping gently, bronze wheels clattering softly onto tabletops. One man rubs sleep from his eyes and accidentally smears ink across his cheek. Another stretches and cracks his back audibly, as though time has bent his spine just as much as the bowls bend the hours. They're tired, but they don't stop tinkering, because curiosity chases them deeper than fatigue. Asterisk. You recline against the doorway, drowsy from the low lamplight, and realize the room feels like a lullaby of creation. A toy bird clinking against a stone wall. The scratch of a reed pen sketching impossible contraptions. The faint perfume of cedarwood sawdust, dislodged from carving. Even here, invention feels less like ambition and more like comforter, gentle answer to boredom, a way to frame the flow of otherwise quiet hours. Asterisk. Another bowl sinks faintly somewhere beyond the walls, its echo slipping into the workroom unnoticed or maybe entirely noticed. For each bowl that dips, a new thought rises, a gear to refine, a lamp wick to float, a pocket dial to carve smaller. Asterisk. You exhale, eyelids heavy, realizing the Persian Empire wasn't only swords and ceremonies, it was also bowls and bird toys, gears and small giggles. Empires often seem thunderous in history books, but here in the midnight workroom, you understand the truth. They were also gentle tinkerers, keeping themselves awake under oil lamps, inventing the small wonders that softened the world. From the hushed hum of the inventor's nook, you wander back into the palace's wider veins. The air shifts again, less oil and cedar here, more spice and perfume. A quiet stir of voices, clipped by foreign accents, rides through the corridor. And there, under a painted arch trimmed in turquoise tiles, a group of men and women stand draped in travel robes, their sandals dusty from weeks, maybe months, caravanning across half a world. You've stumbled upon the diplomatic visitors gathering. Asterisk. A row of cushioned seats welcomes them, each guest sinking down with that relieved sigh you recognize as the universal finally of travelers everywhere. Their gowns and robes are trimmed differently than the Persians. One guest wears bright indigo dye, with woven shells stitched across his sash. Another's cloak bears patterns, geometric and sharp, like triangles holding tiny suns. Gold bangles clink softly as a woman raises her jeweled wrist to adjust her veil. They look curious, slightly dazzled, and maybe a touch puzzled by the splendor sprawling around them. Asterisk. A tray of pomegranates is set before them, their ruby seeds glowing jewel-like in candlelight. Yet more captivating is their hushed talk. This is their first time in a palace where time hums, not from bells or trumpets, but from bowls. One clears his throat, leaning toward his neighbor. You mean to tell me, he whispers in an accent thick with sand and travel, you actually pace your meals by crockery sinking in fountains? Another bites a pomegranate seed thoughtfully, trying not to laugh. You sense they are politely baffled and privately amused. Asterisk. One good historical fact grounds this scene. The Persian Empire didn't exist in isolation, but thrived by pulling cultures to its court. Ambassadors from India, Greece, Egypt, and beyond came here to forge alliances, bear gifts, and sometimes to just GAWP respectfully at Persian splendor. Courtly exchanges of ideas often traveled further than the silk itself, carrying architectural inspiration, mathematical tricks, and medical remedies along the empire's veins. But within the grandeur lies a quirkier postcard memory. Some visitors, baffled by Persia's obsession, copied little pieces of it badly. Tales suggest traveling dignitaries tried building their own water clocks back home, but without the careful tuning, ended up with bowls that sank far too quickly, or not at all. Imagine an Egyptian diplomat proudly unveiling a clock to his court that measured 4 meals in the time of 1. Or a Greek philosopher realizing his hour had stretched for an entire afternoon. Inevitable laughter followed, and maybe that's history's gentlest international incident. Yet. Historians still scratch their heads at a deeper question. Did these visitors view water clocks as serious statecraft, or simply as novelty, something exotic to speak of at their own banquets? Was it practical genius they admired, or eccentricity they chuckled at privately? The line blurs, leaving us wondering whether bowls drifting in Persian fountains were tools of diplomacy or conversation pieces to pad out long, awkward silences. Around the gathering. Servants pour sweet wine, gestures respectful but measured. The ambassadors sip, still exchanging side-eyed smiles at the bowl's punctuality, echoing faintly beyond walls. One man jokes, perhaps a little too loudly, that if his wife governed her days by sinking bowls, she'd at least stop accusing him of being late home. The others laugh, though they cough to disguise it. Nothing like timing humor on foreign soil. Meanwhile, the king enters briefly, his robe glistening with faint gold thread. He greets them graciously, listening to their rehearsed flattery, before gesturing toward a servant. The servant bows and announces softly, "Another bowl has sunk." Courses of fruit and new conversation follow, as though this were an entirely natural announcement. The guests trying in vain to hide both curiosity and skepticism. A Greek envoy whispers nervously to another, "Does he do this for everything? Even, royal matters?" You can almost see the thought bubble above their heads. Do Persians time treaties with dripping bowls? You stifle a smile. Outside of the palace walls, the question would sound absurd. Here though, cushioned by rugs, warmed by wine, it feels oddly fitting. One bowl dips, another rises, and the visitors, bewildered but enchanted, lean further back on their benches. They may not admit it out loud, but you catch something in their eyes. A slowing, a softening. They've started pacing their sips, their laughs, and even their questions, to the rhythm of Persian water. The bowls may confuse them, but gently, incrementally, the kingdom's rhythm captures them too. The laughter of the visiting envoys fades behind you as the palace corridors slope inward again, drawing you closer to the heart of the kingdom, not in grandeur this time, but in contemplation. You find the king alone, not surrounded by the full orchestra of courtiers, not distracted by poets, guards, or merchants. Just him, a marble bench, and that familiar basin where bowls drift patiently. He isn't speaking. He isn't signing decrees or correcting anyone's posture. The ruler of Persia, master of armies, commander of caravans, sits silently watching a copper bowl wobble and slowly drink itself into the depths of water. His robe drapes softly across the stone, embroidered lions glowing faintly in the torchlight, though his posture is less lion and more weary traveler. In this moment, he's just a man measuring something he'll never quite contain. He leans forward as another bowl is placed gently at the surface. The faint rippling pattern reflects across his face lines carved not only by age, but by all the moments he's lived to count. His gaze is steady, yet there's the faintest flicker of melancholy. For all his fascination with regulating hours, he cannot truly command them. One undeniable historical truth grounds this moment. Persian kings were often portrayed as larger-than-life divine shadows whose words shaped entire empires. Yet, records also remind us they valued philosophy, reflection, and the kind of nightly musing that feels oddly relatable. They contemplated mortality, justice, and in this king's case, the elusive flow of time itself. And tucked between those grand thoughts lies a subtler, quirkier detail whispered from quieter sources. Some rulers were rumored to get delightfully lost in their hobbies, leaving courtiers awkwardly waiting for decisions while they counted bowls in fountains, or listened to storytellers spin fables past midnight. You grin softly at the Idean Empire's nervous emissaries fidgeting at the gates while their monarch thinks, yes, but did that last bowl sink too quickly? Here's where the deeper debate hums. Unanswerable yet pressing, what was the king's true purpose in his obsession with water clocks? Did he hope to master the flow of life by precision, organizing court and cosmos alike? Did he fear mortality gnawing at him, and so tried to hold each dripping second? Or did he simply like the calming sound and make everyone else play along? Historians still shrugged, tilting their heads like curious owls. The truth is lost, layered beneath centuries of interpretations. You watch his fingers trace lightly against his knee, almost mimicking the circle of a bowl. His breathing matches the rhythm of the drip and sink. For a figure so mighty, the humility is striking. He seems perfectly aware of his throne's grandeur, and yet utterly at peace with staring into a basin to puzzle out the simplest, most universal riddle: how to live inside time instead of losing to it. A breeze sneaks through the carved lattice windows. It tugs at his robe, lifting the embroidered gold thread ever so slightly. His gaze follows it to the stars beyond, as if even he understands the astrologer's sighs. The storyteller's voice, the guard's echoing steps all threads in the same woven rhythm. His lips twitch, faintly amused, as if sharing a private joke with the cosmos. Even kings cannot command minutes. At best, we borrow bowls. You realize something quietly profound. This entire palace breathes in his curiosity. The gardens, the soldiers pacing, the guests' bewilderment, the inventors tinkering, all of it swirls around his fascination with slipping water. Not because they must, but because they, too, become caught by the hypnotic drops echoing through marble halls. His obsession has become an empire's lullaby. Another bowl tips under. He exhales deeply, leaning back across the bench cushions with something like relief, or surrender, or both. His beard glimmers faintly from a slant of torchlight. His eyes blur into reflection, and you're invited into that same shared pause, the softness of a monarch realizing that even rulers drift in the same stream as servants. Courtiers, gardeners, and strangers, leaning on pillows half a world away. You sit with him quietly, listening to the ripple climb down the basin. No words are exchanged. None are needed. The king's reflection is enough to pull you inward, too. You feel your own pulse slow, your breath deepen, your body sink just a little further into this shared silence where water rules everything and no one minds. You stay with the king in his thoughtful stillness until the torch smoke curls upward, and the breeze through the lattice windows grows cooler, almost urging you outside. You follow that air, hushed and steady, until you emerge once more into the midnight courtyard. The feast, the astrologer, the storytellers, all those sounds have slipped away. What lingers now is an almost eerie gentleness, a hush deep enough that you hear your own sandals brushing against gravel. The moon has climbed above the palace, its pale silver spilling across marble tiles and water pools alike. The basins glimmer like mirrors scattered across the earth, trembling slightly with the touch of small ripples. Another bowl bobs delicately on the surface, carrying the weight of moments old and new. Then, with perfect patience, it tilts, fills, and finally slips under, vanishing with a faint gulp that echoes into the silence. Asterisk. This garden lives in two symphonies, the whispering water and the quiet applause of wind whispering through the trees. Olive branches rustle like lazy hands, waving you toward sleep. The scent of roses still hangs in the air, though it feels muted now, more lullaby than seduction. A nightingale sings in fits and starts, as if even its wings are heavy with drowsiness, releasing only the laziest of trills. Asterisk. You find a spot along the edge of the reflecting pool, cool marble pressing against you as you lower yourself onto the stone. The water is still enough that the moon appears double the one above you, one below, and in between, drifting about like servants between masters, are the bowls, those fragile, quiet keepers of time. Asterisk. You wonder again, did the king ever end an evening just like this? Alone with the bowls, no courtiers or scribes, just him, the moon, and the certainty that every empire, no matter how mighty, is truly measured by these small, sinking sighs. Probably, perhaps even tonight, in the room behind you, he still sits leaning on his hand the way you saw him before, shifting slightly with every drip. Asterisk here. You understand what the bowls have been doing to you all along. They've slowed your walk, softened your breathing, quieted the pace of your thoughts. At the start of this journey you might have grinned at the absurdity of a king who measured his life with floating pottery. Yet now, under the silver wash of moon and the steady rhythm of disappearing bowls, you can't help but see the wisdom in it.